The fuel truck didn't come on Monday. That was the first sign. Gale Harmon noted it the way a farmer notes most things, quietly with a pause, then back to work. He'd been farming outside Millard County since 1961. He knew supply hiccups, a broken-down tanker, a route delay, maybe the driver sick. These things happened. The truck would come Tuesday. It didn't come Tuesday either. By Wednesday morning, Gale drove to the Millard County Farm Co-op on Route 12, not because he was worried, just because he wanted to know when to expect the delivery. The co-op manager, a man named Burl Trask, was standing in the parking lot when Gale pulled in, and the look on Burl's face said something before his mouth did. "We suspended supply," Burl said. No softening, just the fact. Gale asked why. The answer was tangled, the way these things always were in 1984. Interest rates had squeezed the regional fuel distributor's operating credit. The bank had tightened terms. The distributor had reduced deliveries county-wide while they renegotiated their line. Nobody knew how long. Could be a week. Could be 3. Gale drove back to the farm. He had hay down. The Harmon operation ran about 240 acres, mixed hay ground, and some corn on the north end. It wasn't large by modern standards even then, but it was enough to need a lot of diesel to run. The big John Deere 4440 sitting in the machine shed burned roughly 6 gallons an hour under load. The 1,200-gallon tank behind the barn had somewhere around 310 gallons left when Gale checked it Wednesday afternoon. He dipped the stick himself, wiped it, looked at the number. His son Wade was leaning against the shed door watching. Wade Harmon was 19 that summer. He'd graduated from Millard County High the previous spring, put off college, or at least said he was putting it off, to work the farm through the year. He was not a romantic about farming. He'd grown up in it, which meant he'd grown up watching money move in and out of seasons the way weather moved through, unpredictably and without sentiment. He did the math faster than his father. "That's maybe 50 hours on the 4440, Wade said. "Less if we're running the mower conditioner full time." Gale nodded. "We've got 80 acres down." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Scale works when fuel flows. The Harmon farm had upgraded to the 4440 3 years earlier, 1981, when credit was still available and the USDA was still telling farmers to get big or get out. The machine was capable. It could run the rotary mower, the large rake, the baler, all of it. But capable machines burn capable amounts of diesel. 6 gallons an hour was the price of that capacity. With 310 gallons and an unknown shortage, 50 hours of runtime wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. The hay that was already down was the immediate problem. Gale had cut 80 acres of mixed grass alfalfa starting the previous Friday, expecting the June weather window to hold. The forecast had looked reasonable. 3 clear days, then maybe some clouds, enough to ted, dry, rake, and bale before anything complicated arrived. But by Wednesday, the cut hay had been lying in the field for 5 days. It had wilted, but hadn't cured fully. A few more days of good airflow and sun, and it would be ready. That window was tightening. A new forecast was running on the radio in the kitchen. Rain system building from the southwest. Possible arrival Saturday evening. Maybe Sunday morning. That was 3, maybe 4 days. Gale wanted to wait for diesel. He was frank about it. "They'll get supply moving again. It's a credit issue, not a physical shortage. The fuel exists." Wade didn't argue the point directly. He just kept looking at the hay field through the kitchen window. 80 acres of drying hay, 4 days of weather left, and 50 hours of diesel in a machine that would need most of those hours just to run the mowing equipment. Never mind the tedding and raking and baling. "We need to ted today," Wade said. "With what fuel?" Wade didn't answer immediately. He went out to the equipment shed. The old hay tedder had been sitting under a tarp in the back of the shed since at least 1979. It was a Fella KH300, a 6-rotor mechanical tedder that ran off the tractor's PTO. No hydraulics, no complex system, pure mechanical drive. It had been built in the early 1970s and had worked fine for most of that decade until the farm expanded, and Gale bought a wider, faster model. The fella got pushed to the back. Wade pulled the tarp off, checked the rotors. Bearings looked okay. Tines were mostly intact, a few missing, nothing structural. The gearbox had old grease in it, but nothing seized. The tedder required around 45 to 55 PTO horsepower to run effectively. The 4440 was 130 horsepower. That was the wrong machine to pull it. You don't run a 130-horse tractor at 40% load just to save fuel, because the efficiency math doesn't work that way at low throttle. But the farm had a second tractor. The 1968 International Harvester 706 sat in the corner of the shed. It was 94 horsepower on a good day. It hadn't been the primary tractor in years, but it ran. It burned diesel more efficiently at load than the 4440 did at partial throttle, and it could pull the fella without straining. Wade checked the 706's fuel gauge. Maybe 40 gallons in the tank. That was different math. A tractor pulling a mechanical tedder at working load burns roughly 3 to 4 gallons an hour. At that rate, 40 gallons would give Wade close to 10 hours of tedding time. The fella, at walking pace, could cover around 8 to 10 acres per hour depending on field conditions and passes required. 2 passes per field, standard practice for good airflow. 80 acres. That was 16 passes, roughly 16 hours of tedder time. He didn't have enough fuel to do it all, but he might have enough to ted the critical fields, the ones with the heaviest swaths, the ones that needed the most airflow to cure before rain. Wade did not announce this calculation like a plan. He walked back into the kitchen and said, "The 706 can pull the fella. I want to start this afternoon." Gale looked at him. "That tedder's 15 years old." "The rotors still spin. It's slow." "I know. Diesel didn't come. The tanks kept dropping. The hay couldn't wait." Gale's hesitation was not stubbornness. It was experience. He'd watched equipment fail at critical moments before. The fella's gearbox hadn't been serviced in years. The 706 had an oil seal that needed watching. Starting an old machine in the middle of a fuel shortage, with rain incoming and no support system available, was a gamble. If the tedder broke down in the field, they'd have to use the 4440 with its 6-gallon-per-hour appetite to finish. And that would drain the main tank even faster. He also wasn't convinced the shortage would last. Burl Trask had said, "credit issue." Credit issues got resolved. Banks didn't want to watch fuel distributors fail. Supply would return. Maybe. But it was already Wednesday afternoon. 3 days to rain. Wade hitched the fella to the 706. Gale watched from the shed doorway, said nothing, went back inside. The 706 started on the 3rd try. It had that sound old tractors have. Not smooth, not modern, just mechanical and stubborn and present. Wade backed it out of the shed, drove to the south field, dropped the PTO, and the rotors started turning. The old tedder kept moving. The neighbors noticed. That was inevitable in 1984 in Millard County. Boyd Schenner, who farmed the adjacent quarter section, drove past on his way to town Thursday morning and slowed his truck when he saw Wade in the field with the 706 and the old fella. He rolled his window down. "That the old tedder?" he called across the fence. Wade nodded. "Where's the 4440? "In the shed." Boyd looked at the slow-moving tractor, the rotors flipping hay, the modest pace of the whole operation. He didn't say anything rude. He just had that look. The look of someone calculating how long this would take and how much work was not getting done. "You're going to be at this for days," Boyd said. "Yeah," Wade said. Boyd drove off. The thing is, Boyd wasn't wrong. The fellow was covering roughly 8 to 9 acres per hour. The 4440 with the newer wide tedder could have covered 15 to 18. Wade was moving at half speed, which meant the same work took twice as long. In a normal season, that would matter enormously. Time is fuel is money. But this was not a normal season. Big machines burn big promises. And the big machines were sitting. Across the valley that week, 3 other farms had large equipment idled by the same fuel shortage. The Kruger operation over on the county road had their big 7.520 Deere parked because they'd burned through their stored fuel earlier in the week trying to finish a late cultivation pass. The Wallaces had made the decision to wait for supply to return before they ran anything non-essential. The Pattersons were actually driving 30 miles to another county to try to buy diesel retail at significantly higher prices to keep their operation moving. Wade was out there with a 1968 tractor and a mechanical tedder, burning 3 gallons an hour, covering ground. Slowly, but covering it. By Thursday evening, he'd tedded 47 acres. His back knew it. The 706 had no cab, just an open platform and the sun all afternoon. He'd stopped twice to check tines, once to tighten a loose bolt on the gearbox guard. The machine had complained a little around hour 6, a grinding noise that turned out to be a stuck tine on rotor 4. He'd stopped, freed it with a wrench, kept going. He checked the 706's fuel tank when he got back to the shed. About 18 gallons left. He did the math again. 18 gallons at 3. 5 gallons per hour, call it 5 hours of runtime. He still had 33 acres left to ted. The numbers didn't work. He went back to the main tank. Gale was watching from the porch. The main tank had 296 gallons. Gale had been running the 44-440 minimally, just moving equipment around, about 3 hours of low-load time. That left roughly 278 gallons, if they were careful. They had a conversation that wasn't loud, but wasn't comfortable. Gale wanted to preserve the 44-440's fuel for baling. If they used it for anything else, including running the modern wide tedder, they might not have enough diesel to bale what they'd already cut. The baler was the revenue step. Everything before it was preparation. Lose the baling fuel, you lose the crop. Wade understood that. His argument was simpler. If the hay didn't dry, it didn't matter how much baling fuel they had. Gale authorized 20 gallons transferred to the 706. That was the compromise. Friday morning, the sky changed. Not rain yet, but the southwestern horizon had that flat gray look that farmers read differently than almanacs do. The clouds were building in layers, the high, thin cirrus first, then the thicker middle layer starting to push in around noon. The radio updated the forecast. Rain now expected Saturday afternoon, possibly as early as Saturday morning. Wade was in the field by 7 a.m. He had 33 acres left to ted, 20 gallons of additional fuel, the 706 running at about 3. 3 gallons per hour in field conditions. Call it 6 hours of run time. At 8 to 9 acres per hour, 6 hours was 48 to 54 acres of coverage. If the tractor didn't overheat, if the tines held, if he didn't have to redo passes on the heavier swaths. The hay couldn't wait. He drove straight through the morning. The rotors threw cut grass into the air in slow arcs, the smell of drying alfalfa mixing with the diesel exhaust from the 706. You can tell hay that's curing properly. It goes from a green, heavy smell to something drier and lighter. By Friday mid-morning, the fields he'd tedded Thursday were starting to smell right. Not done, but moving in the right direction. He checked moisture by hand the way his father had taught him. Grab a handful of hay, twist it hard between both palms, feel for springiness versus stiffness. Too springy meant too wet. Thursday's hay was getting close, but the new stuff, the 33 acres he hadn't touched, was still dense and damp in the swath. It needed the airflow. It needed the tedder. The tanks kept dropping. At 11 a.m., he stopped to check the 706's tank, about 12 gallons. He kept going. Boyd Shenner's farm was visible from the south field. Boyd's 4440 equivalent, a big case tractor, was parked at the field edge. Boyd had driven to the next county for fuel Thursday and come back with what he could get in portable tanks. Expensive, but running. Boyd's tedder was newer, faster, already through his fields. He'd finished Thursday night. He wasn't running baling fuel on a mechanical tedder. He was running retail diesel at premium prices. Efficiency depends on supply. Boyd had found supply at a cost. Wade hadn't. He was burning the last of the reserve. By 2 p.m. Friday, Wade had completed the remaining 33 acres. The last 2 acres were sloppy. He'd rushed the overlap to save fuel, and the coverage wasn't perfect. He'd have to hope the wind did some of the work. He drove the 706 back to the shed. He turned off the engine and sat on the platform for a minute. His hands were stiff from gripping the steering wheel. The sun had burned the back of his neck for 2 days running. The seat pan of the old tractor had no cushion worth mentioning. He got down, checked the tank. 4 gallons. He'd made it by 4 gallons. Gale came out to meet him. He'd been watching from the yard. They didn't say much. Gale looked at the fuel gauge, looked at his son, nodded once. That was the conversation. The old tedder kept moving until it was done. Saturday morning, the wind picked up from the southwest. Not rain yet, just pressure. Wade and Gale ran the rake on Thursday's hay with the 4440, burning about 2 gallons per acre, burning fuel they'd rationed carefully. The windrows came up clean and dry. By Saturday noon, they started baling. The baler ran on the 4440. That 6-gallon-per-hour reality was unavoidable. Baling couldn't be done with a lighter machine, but they had rationed carefully enough that they had fuel to run. Not comfortably, not with reserve, but enough to run. The first drops of rain hit the roof of the machine shed at 4:47 p.m. Saturday. By then, they had 63 acres baled, stacked in the barn, dry. The remaining 17 acres were still in the windrow. Wade covered them with tarps, the heavy canvas ones from the barn, and drove the baler inside. They watched the rain. It rained most of Saturday night and into Sunday morning. Not a catastrophic amount. About 1. 2 inches at the gauge, but enough. Sunday afternoon, Wade walked the covered windrows, pulled back a tarp. The hay underneath was intact, not perfect. Some moisture had crept in at the edges, but it was salvageable. The Kruger operation's hay was not. The Krugers had waited for diesel supply to return. It hadn't returned in time. Their 80 acres of cut hay had sat in flat swaths without tedding, the heavy, dense cut baking in the sun, but not drying evenly, then catching the rain on Saturday without ever being properly cured. Monday morning, Boyd Shenner drove past their fields and reported what he saw to anyone who'd listen. Green spots, heat damage, the beginning of mold working through the bottom of the swaths. Not all of it, maybe 40 acres worth of loss, but real loss. The Wallaces lost about 25 acres, same reason. They'd waited for supply and the hay paid for the wait. The Pattersons, who'd burned expensive retail diesel, had tedded and baled most of their fields by Friday. They'd spent more than anyone to keep moving, but they'd kept moving. Their hay was in the barn. Wade and Gale had spent almost nothing beyond existing fuel. The 706 had burned maybe 70 gallons of diesel running the fella for 2 days. The main tank had been preserved for baling. The system had worked, not because it was faster, not because it was smarter, but because it was cheap enough to run when cheap was all that was available. The difference was not dramatic. Let's be clear about that. The Harmon farm didn't sell their hay at premium prices. The market in 1984 was not generous. The farm crisis was grinding through every operation in the county, and hay prices reflected that. They baled 63 acres of sound hay, sold it at ordinary rates, and covered their operating costs for that cutting. What they avoided was the loss. 40 acres of ruined hay at 1984 prices, even depressed prices, represented roughly $3,200 to $4,000 in lost crop. For a farm running on thin margins and a banknote that required renewal in the fall, that difference mattered. It didn't save the farm, it didn't make them prosperous, but it meant one less conversation with the bank about shortfalls. One fewer difficult calculation that fall. Small machines look outdated until supply stops. The Fella KH300 had been built for a world where fuel was not guaranteed. Not because anyone designed it that way intentionally, but because the 1970s had taught some manufacturers to keep things simple enough to run with what was available. Mechanical PTO drive, rotor tines, no computer, no hydraulic dependency, no fuel requirements beyond what a modest tractor could provide. In a normal season, you'd look at that machine and call it obsolete. In June 1984, in Millard County, with diesel deliveries suspended and a rain system moving in, it kept 63 acres of hay dry. That was its only job. It did it. Diesel didn't come back to the county until the following Thursday. 11 days after the first missed delivery, Burl Trask at the co-op posted a notice that supply was resuming at reduced allocation. Farmers could get 60% of their standard order per week until the distributor's credit situation resolved. 60%. The big machines that had been sitting, the Kruger's tractor, the Wallace's equipment, came back to life. But the hay was already gone. The window had closed. Rain-damaged swaths were being plowed under or written off. Gale filed the incident in the same mental ledger where he kept other things he'd learned the hard way. He didn't announce a new philosophy. He didn't lecture anyone. He just noted that the 706 should stay serviced and the Fella should stay greased, and that storage capacity for diesel on site was worth thinking about before next season. Wade went back to other work. Fence repair. Cultivation. The 100 other things a farm requires. He didn't take credit for the decision. It hadn't been a complicated decision. It had been the obvious one given the constraints. Old equipment, low fuel consumption. Fields that needed work. Timetable that wouldn't wait. The logic had pointed in one direction and he'd followed it. In a crisis, survival beats expansion. The 706 went back to the corner of the machine shed. The Fella went back under its tarp. The big 44440 ran the rest of the season, but Gale kept better fuel records after that, tracked consumption against stored supply, built a small reserve the following fall. Nothing dramatic. Just an extra 300 gallons in a second tank, enough to run a lighter machine for 2 weeks if supply ever got interrupted again. He also kept the 706 serviced. Not because he expected another shortage. He didn't know what to expect. Nobody in 1984 knew what the farm crisis would do next or how long supply instability would last. He kept it serviced because a tractor that works costs almost nothing to maintain and almost everything to be without. When diesel didn't come, the big machines stopped. The old tedder kept moving. The hay in the barn represented a choice made on a Wednesday afternoon with a fuel gauge at 310 gallons and a rain system 4 days out. Not a dramatic choice, not a visionary one. Just a practical calculation made in a season when practical calculations were survival. Is bigger always better? Not when the fuel supply fails. Not when the next delivery is unknown. Not when the weather window is closing and the machine in the shed is the one that can actually run on what's left. If you've ever had to decide between waiting for better conditions and working with what you have, subscribe. These are the stories worth remembering. Diesel didn't come. The old tedder kept moving.